with all of these things, there's a historical context, sadly, when you're looking at ill treatment and abuse of people with LD autism. And I just wanted to sort of draw on some of that because if you go back to the 1960s, as far back as then, you had Ely Hospital in Cardiff, 1969. There was a Royal Commission looking at the ill treatment of people with LD autism, institutional abuse all those years ago. And that sort of catalyzed a shift away from institutional care, away from the hospitals, the inpatient settings. And obviously, we then had care in the community in the 1980s and the closure of the long stay psychiatric hospitals, which of course was a very good thing. Then we had long care. You may remember sort of long care in the 1990s in Buckinghamshire, some of you, if you've been around as long as I have. And that was one where there'd been institutional residential abuse of people with LD autism over a 10-year period. There was an investigation and there was a report called the Bergman Report. And one of the recommendations from that was that they would set up national inspectorates because of the failings in local regulation in relation to that particular scandal. Again, there were convictions, went to jail, people went to jail. But again, that's another example, a seismic shift. It led to the National Care Standards Commission, the Commission for Social Care Inspection, and obviously now we've got the Care Quality Commission. So that drew on a scandal in the LD autism sector. And then, of course, we've got Winterbourne View in 2011, the panorama expose that I just mentioned. And on the back of that, there was what is called the Transforming Care Agenda to try and really move people out of mental hospitals, inpatient settings, assessment and treatment units into specialist community settings. So all those years after Ely Hospital in 1969, we were still sort of faced with the same problems. And at the time of Winterbourne View, there were about 3,400 people in inpatient settings, and the government set the target of reducing that to 1,500 by 2017, but it didn't meet that target. And as at the end of last year, there were still over 2,000 people in inpatient settings with LD autism, of which over 1,000 have actually been in the settings for over 2 years, so long stay in those settings. And evidence suggests that certainly at least a third of those could actually be moved to community specialist settings if they existed and if there was a will on the part of commissioners to actually sort of enable that to happen. And of course, the regulator as well has a role in ensuring that happens. And one final thing I just wanted to flag up was the issue about the Mental Health Act 2025 that's just come on the statute book, because one of the things that's saying is that in due course, when it comes into force, somebody can't be detained simply because they have a learning disability or they have autism. That's not going to be, there's going to have to be a proper diagnosis of a mental disorder to enable a section to take place. So that's interesting, isn't it? All those years that that's been in place, it shows a certain attitude towards this particular setting, really, in people that do have learning disabilities and autism. So the purpose of this webinar is to reflect on what has and hasn't happened over the last 15 years since Winterbourne View, offer you practical insights to obviously sort of to providers and managers in terms of how you run your services and can improve your services, but also at the same time recognizing as well that there are a great number of very, very good providers out there. We come across them all the time, and congratulations to you for the excellent work that you do. But obviously it's a good reminder of where we are now in 2026 and how we can keep this focus really sort of on the individual, on the service users to ensure that they have the best quality of life and the safest possible care. So what I'd like to do first of all is open a question to Tim, if I may, which is about transforming care targets and why they've been missed. So Tim, why has it proved so difficult to achieve the transforming care target, do you think?
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for the introduction. It was interesting when you said that there were still 2,000 people in those long stay institutions. But if we compare that to what that was like 100 years ago, that was 100,000 people. So we have made some progress, haven't we? But In terms of why has transforming care not been as successful as it was intended, I think it comes down to two things, with a few supplementary issues. And I think the two main things are the difficulties of registering those services, and the second one is the pressures on commissioning. So think about CQC registration. That was relatively easy after Winterbourne. But then CQC introduced registering the right support, building upon building the right support, and then this number of they wouldn't register services for more than 6 people. And that suddenly came in almost overnight. And I can recall working with a provider, a good provider, that wanted to increase the number of people they supported just by two. And they'd actually gone through all of the process to create the accommodation. And even today, it's still not been registered because of registering the right support. Since 2021, 2022, learning disabilities has been a specific condition on CQC registration, and it's a specific condition on registration certificates. And providers must explicitly apply to support that group of individuals. But that requires demonstration, not just of a desire and expertise and knowledge, but also they need to demonstrate that there's a local need for that support. They need to get the support of local authorities. And that's incredibly difficult, isn't it? How can you go to a local authority and say, I need you to say you support my application for registration? Because that's almost a commitment to purchase services. And local authorities can't do that, can they? All they can do is direct the provider to the market position statement. And some of those are really good because they say this is what we want to commission, supported living for people with learning disabilities and autism. But others are a bit more vague. And often they cover a very wide period of time as well. And now we have right support, right care, right culture. Now, I'm really glad that CQC have updated its guidance about right support, right care, right culture, because when it originally came out, it didn't really say to support providers what they had to do. It just gave some examples of this is good and this is not so good, but it didn't explicitly say what right support is. It didn't say what right care is, and it didn't say what right culture is. But providers are inspected, and even today are inspected against this guidance. And that sets a really high bar for services in terms of their model of care, premises, staffing, and governance. And there is still reference to campus style and congregate settings, and still a preference, but not explicit, for services no larger than 6 people. But we know, don't we, that there are some services that have been registered for many years and they are campus settings. I have clients that operate such services and they are good services. They are safe services, but they don't fit the current model. And it's very difficult today. It's time consuming. There's a very high bar to get a learning disability service registered. And registration's become tougher lately, hasn't it? Especially for interviews for the registered manager role. If someone hasn't been a manager in that sector before, those interviews, I hear stories of 2 to 3 hours of interview, and I think that's good. I think there should be much more onerous put on interviews to make sure people are fit and proper people. But sometimes, and I also hear stories where people have been a previously registered manager, then it's almost as simple as a very short 20-minute meeting online or a phone call, or sometimes it's just approved. But in learning disability services, it's usually quite a robust interview. And then we come on to commissioning. I mean, who pays for it? I mean, local authorities are incredibly strapped for cash. When someone's in an inpatient unit or long-stay institution, the bill is picked up by the NHS. So what's the incentive for local authorities? And these are high-value care provision, aren't they? And it can be a bit vague. I mean, I know of clients that know of other providers running unregulated services because they don't provide personal care, doesn't need CQC registration. And commissioners can place people in those unregulated services. They don't have personal care, but it's a much lower cost. So I think for people with relatively low needs, transforming care has been quite successful. But for those people with more complex needs, where the cost is significant on a weekly, monthly, annual, and also whole life basis, that's significant. And maybe the cheapest option, and that doesn't sound right, does it, is for them to be in the long stay institution. But does society really want people with learning disabilities in the community? As a provider, I started as a provider in 1990. I mean, I was one of those people that took people from those long stay institutions and gave them what I hope was a great life. But we faced hostility in the community. We faced harassment from neighbours. That's not so much now, is it? But even today, even this week, I've heard from providers of care, oh, we have hassle off the neighbours. So what's the hassle about? Oh, car parking, they say. But does society really want people with learning disability living next door if that person's out in their garden on their trampoline at 9 o'clock at night making joyful noises? And are we a bit risk averse? Because the medical model of care of disability wasn't it? We will treat you, and if we can't treat you, we will put you somewhere where you're not at risk to yourself or other people. That's what caused the long stay institutions. Are we still a bit risk averse? Is there a little bit of that in the back of the mind of commissioners and social workers? So I think I need to sum up because I've probably overrun a little bit. Was transforming care just time limited rather than a permanent shift? But without the resources, without the infrastructure, progress is always going to be slow or possibly stall. Neil, I'm conscious I probably overrun. I do apologize.
No, that's fine. That was very sort of insightful, Tim. Thank you very much for that. So that's helpful. That's looking at transforming care. What I'd like to do now is moving on to Sarah, if I may, looking at sort of commissioning again, really, and safer models of care. Um, Sarah, do you think that commissioning in 2026 does ensure a safer system 15 years on from Winterbourne View?
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for the invitation to speak today. I would say it's a mixed bag, and I think it depends on whereabouts it is. I've been fortunate in during COVID years actually to be involved in some quite big transforming care projects. And during that period of time, it was quite successful where the provider was working with the ICB at the time. And we had a young lady who wanted to return to her hometown. I'm actually sat in Bristol today, not too far away from Winterbourne View, and this young lady was miles and miles away from home in the Midlands and wanted to live in a coastal town close to Bristol. She was taking up two wings of a mental health hospital, and she was on a 5-to-1 ratio of staff, so the cost to the public purse was therefore very high. And we managed with the transforming care agenda to get a purchase of a bungalow, and that bungalow needed to be adapted. So it was a long project. So, I don't want to name an individual to be a project. So we're human beings, but, it had to be a project where there was multiple partners involved, so the local authority, the NHS, and the different funding streams, but also having conversations with builders and accommodation and estate agents. So it's not easy to move somebody from that situation to the community. And echoing what Tim said about the right culture, and for actually what we were able to do is demonstrate the evidence that she could move from a 5-to-1 ratio. We could get her 2-to-1, and she was even sometimes at baseline at 1-to-1 in the community. So it might have seemed like very massive cost in the beginning, but cost is not just the financial cost. The cost to her was she actually started to have a meaningful life, could access her community, do some, what we might call risky activities, just like going to the shop. But, for her, she could then have, and we got the behaviours down as well. So, that moving from institution to the community there was very successful. But that was during COVID years. Fast forward 4 or 5 years now, I've got a client that I'm working with, for example, where a social worker's gone on long-term sick only yesterday, and we're right at the decision-making panel thing where we don't think that person is in the right place or in the right culture for their needs. They probably need to move more to a one-to-one thing. And I'm not knocking local authorities because they're stretched as well. So things are taking a long time. Sometimes we don't have all the information from the local authority, even though we're giving them lots of information. So I think there needs to be more partnership working approach to make this more efficient. Money is always an issue as well. I think, because it's public money, we have to be very mindful of that. But I'm also very proactive about not warehousing people at a high ratio. If we can evidence the need and we can work with people, I've worked with young teenagers of 13, 14 with significant trauma, but then moving them down, and that's evidencing that we can get this, and that's going to be music to the ears of commissioners, that you might start at 5-to-1 and getting them down to 1-to-1 or 2-to-1, is actually success for everybody, because, that's for me, seeing someone have that meaningful life, really. And as a parent carer as well, I'm very passionate about that.
Sarah, thank you very much for that, and also for highlighting, obviously, the fact that we're talking about sort of children and adults, of course, and
Yes.
sometimes that transition between being a child and being an adult, that can be the most difficult time, can't it? The most challenging time, and people can
Yeah.
be sort of can be left really without the
Yeah.
appropriate support. So no, that's been really helpful. Thank you. And then if I might sort of move on now next to Eddie. And Eddie, we want to sort of turn to compliance now. And really, if you could sort of highlight what you think are some of the key themes, Eddie, from your visiting of services around the country, LD and autism services, and how you sort of assist, support and signpost providers.
Thanks for the introduction, Neil, and what a panel to follow. Yeah, really interesting so far. So my background, as Neil mentioned earlier on, is that I have been a registered manager of services for adults with learning disabilities and autism in England, maybe a little while ago now, but I also was very privileged to do that. And then I feel very privileged to have worked as an inspector for the CQC. So I've been inspected, and I've also inspected others. And now I kind of merge that together and support providers, and I see some similar themes across the services that I go into, and how I like to focus their attention is on making sure that they're seeing it's such a, as we've just heard, that there are so many pressures for our managers. Being a registered manager is such a juggling act. And for the regional managers then supporting them, it's a really, really hard job. And it's never been any different, but I think there are additional pressures or different pressures now. What I always say to providers is really understand your regulations. Really understand your regulated activity. The amount of times that I speak to managers, new managers, I may not have met them before, and they focus very much on CQC's methodology, formerly the CLOES, now Single Assessment Framework. That's under again a lot of change, and they sort of immerse themselves in that, but actually fail to see the connection with the regulation, which is actually the law. So you can be doing lots of nice stuff with your service users or the people that you support, but your evidence of that and how you're actually meeting the law might be quite limited. So I would always start with that and try and ascertain from a manager their understanding of the regulations. And it's all there on the CQC's website to see. And I draw their attention. We have discussions, live discussions about things like dignity, Regulation 10, safe care and treatment, Regulation 12, governance, Regulation 17. Now, no inspector is going to expect you to memorize all of this, but it's really important that our managers and our providers link that up. So some of the common things in specialist services, such as for adults with learning disabilities and autism, that they need to think about, and Tim mentioned it earlier on, is right support, right care, right culture. That is CQC's guidance framework. They are expecting you to have knowledge of that. And I think it's really important, whatever your view is of CQC or of that framework, that you need to understand it and the history behind it and where that's come from. So it's super important that for confidence that you understand, you read and your team, you have discussions with your team about that. And you are able to converse when you are being inspected. That's really important. Other things that I think are common themes is everybody has to, under regulation, create a statement of purpose. This is across the social care board, but I think, again, very important to this particular community is don't just do it as a tick box. Make sure that it really captures your values, your culture, and that underpins your statement of purpose. Don't let it collect dust digitally or on your shelf. Make sure that your staff team are aware of it, and you also make sure that the people that you're supporting are aware as much as they're able of your statement of purpose. What are you about as a provider? There are often disconnect between the statement of purpose, your values and culture. You might be able to sit there and tell me what you want to do, but have you reflected that in your statement of purpose? And that's where staff teams come in, supervisions, one-to-one, where you can really embed the values of your service. And again, just make sure that comes out in that piece of documentation. And there is, you know, a template for that. So you don't even have to create your own. Something else I think really, really important and valuable is there's medication, and whether you're supporting people in their own homes or people in care homes, and both can be successful. You know, I've seen successful services in care homes, and I think it's really important to say, and domiciliary and supported living. And I've seen those that perhaps aren't as successful. And some of those reasons are is medication gets quite messy, and providers aren't able to demonstrate and reflect their medication systems and how they're meeting and connecting that to their policy. Again, the policy might be collecting dust digitally and over there on the shelf, but they're not actually using that policy to inform staff, work with the people that they're supporting to promote their independence, because that's really ultimately what it is all about. And an important, and we love an acronym in social care, don't we? We really do love an acronym. Something that an inspector is going to ask your staff, possibly, not always, is they're going to say, what's your view on STOMP? What's your understanding of STOMP? And quite often, a support worker, care assistant, whatever your term is for your staff that are supporting people on a day-to-day basis, they won't know what that means. And I think sometimes it is a little bit unfair if you're asked an acronym, because in the moment when a staff member is nervous, they're going to not think about what that is. But I think that's important that they do understand that stopping the over-medication of people with a learning disability and autism, it was a really important move. And it's really important when you're looking at reducing restrictions, empowering the people that we support, that you understand some of that history, that NHS piece of work. That's something else. Positive behaviour support. Sorry, Neil, you have to tell me if I'm running over, because I could go on forever.
Carry on.
Positive behaviour support shouldn't just be a PBS plan on a digital system or something disconnected to the person. It should be at the centre of what you're doing for that individual. And it's so powerful when used correctly. I know that we're going to be putting some links in as well, Neil, aren't we? Because there's lots and lots of really valuable advice and guidance and signposting when it comes to STOMP and STAMP for the children's sector as well. And guidance around right support, right care, right culture. Something else very commonplace to be missed is an unwise decision versus a mental capacity assessment. Time and time again, I will see a blanket mental capacity assessment. So, and not actually aligning themselves with the law. And that's been in since 2005, quickly followed by the deprivation of liberty safeguards in 2008, and still I find that that's something that when I'm talking with managers and their teams, there's nervousness around the terminology. I think staff members are very good if you're talking to them about consent and why is that important. But as soon as you mention anything like the MCA Act, Mental Capacity Act, and DOLS, people then lose sight and they get really nervous and can't really explain. So I think I'm always signposting to really easy tools. Skills for Care do a great tool that isn't very costly, and I know money is a massive issue. When we're talking about digital care planning, and that might be something we'll get into later, I think the Accessible Information Standard 2015 often gets missed and gets forgotten. And so when I'm talking with teams and I'm saying, so how can you reflect and demonstrate you're meeting the Accessible Information Standard, especially in this community? It's often, well, they've got a care plan and they can see it if they want to, or, blah, blah, blah. And I know we've got some really good care providers out there, but it's really important that there is an understanding about that particular standard and its importance. So yeah, I feel incredibly privileged to be able to provide that operational and compliance, but there definitely are some key themes across the sector that come up time and time again. And I understand there are pressures. I really, really do. But there are some quick wins as well to get it right.
Edina, thank you for that. And also, yeah, just the sort of highlighting again about sort of MCA goals. It's an area that we sort of come up against as lawyers, actually, very often, sort of how that is applied. Obviously, with goals, of course, looking at care homes and hospitals, there's a huge backlog. There's also a huge backlog in terms of community goals, isn't there, as well? And we've obviously got the consultation in the second half of this year about the liberty protection safeguards. Remember those? They're talking about bringing those in. And we've got this move towards supported living in this sector, but very often the individuals in those settings aren't properly sort of protected with appropriate sort of orders, really, of the court, given the backlog and the pressures that local authorities are under. So thank you very much for that. That's been really very helpful indeed.
Thanks,
if
Neil.
we sort of move on now. So Tim, if I could come back to you, the question is what good and outstanding care looks like. You go across the whole country, you see, tens, hundreds of providers over many years. What are regulators looking for? What does good or outstanding care look like in your view?
If only CQC would tell the sector, but they promise to do that, don't they? I think one thing that's most definitely true, achieving a rating of outstanding has got harder and will continue to get harder. Services that were previously rated as outstanding, if the regulator looks at all of the areas of compliance, currently the quality statements, and whatever they will become, it's going to be more difficult to achieve a rating of outstanding. And also, there are services that are sitting with the wrong rating, aren't they? There are a number of services sitting with a rating of requires improvement, and they've addressed all of the areas that need to be fixed. But there are also some services with a rating of good that today wouldn't merit a rating of good. And you see that if you read inspection reports. And when you do what myself, Eddie and Sarah do, we read a lot of CQC inspection reports. So let's look at what is a good service for someone with learning disability and autism. And we haven't got time to go through all of the regulations and all of the quality statements. So this is a whistle-stop tour. Well, for a start, it's having right support, right care, right culture fully embedded into every aspect of service provision. From your vision and value statement, to how you recruit staff, to how you train, supervise staff. It's how you create care plans. Eddie mentioned about accessible care planning. Some of these digital systems, can you provide a copy of someone's care and support plan to them in a format that's accessible? I have some clients that do some excellent work where they use things like social stories to make a social stories support plan. I mean, that's a good way of making it accessible, isn't it? But on a day-to-day basis, what is a good service? It's where people live an ordinary life in ordinary houses that don't look different. I joke often that I can tell when it's a small care service. So how can you tell? I say three things. Lots of cars parked outside, often at weird angles, an assortment of different colour dustbins, and a food hygiene sticker. How many of us have got those things in our house? It's about people not going out into the community. It's about people going out. I don't go out into the community. I just go to the shop. It's about support plans, and we need to move on from person-centered. Person-centered's been around for decades. How about person-led? How about writing care and support plans that start with what matters most to the person? Not what matters to us, not what matters to their social worker, what matters to them. It's about proper writing of outcomes. Outcomes are the end result. It's like Eddie said, it's about getting that Mental Capacity Act applied properly. Done properly, it protects people. Not done properly, it does the opposite. It's about having staff who are competent, consistent, kind, confident, but doing it for the right reasons. It's also about governance structures. There are so many services, especially supported living services, where the nominated individual and the registered manager and the provider are the same person. And sometimes, shouldn't be, they're also the landlord. Where's the governance structure there? But let's take it up a notch. What's outstanding? Evidence. Evidence that the support provided improves people's lives. More choice, more autonomy, having relationships, being supported to vote. It's about being different, being innovative, being creative. It's about trying different things. It's about providing people with what we all would aspire to, a home that we feel comfortable in, one where we feel physically and psychologically safe. It's about leadership at all levels. Leadership that's based upon the organization's values, but those values have to have been created with the stakeholders. And the most important stakeholders are the people whose lives we control, the people whose lives we support. And that brings me on to co-production. Do we really do co-production, or do we pretend to do co-production? You're not doing co-production if the person is just sat there. You're doing co-production if you've enabled them to be an equal partner in co-producing that care plan. And I say it many times, I say it often on social media, data. Data is the most valuable commodity there is. We need to start using and collecting and using and analyzing data, and AI here, it's going to be tremendous for this, to do predictive care, not reactive care, because predictive care anticipates issues before they're a problem, then we don't have to react to the problem. And I, like Eddie, I could go on all day and give you ideas about how you can be good and outstanding, but I'm conscious of Neil looking at his watch and saying time's up. So
no, I think you've got a few more minutes if you want. I mean, that's obviously very powerful that your sort of passion comes through, and obviously that you see this on a day-to-day basis. And I know that you have transformed providers in difficulty, from inadequate to outstanding. You've been on that journey, as Sarah and Eddie have as well. And that's what we're sort of in the game of, obviously, constant, continuous improvement, really. So no, that's really that's great. So thank you for that, for those observations. Now, Sarah, I'd like to move on next, if I may. A big issue with CQC is open versus closed cultures. Obviously, there was Winterbourne. There've been other scandals, haven't there, since Winterbourne? Yeah. Let's not forget that. And CQC has spent a lot of time, hasn't it, thinking about closed cultures, and it has guidance around that. But what do you think defines an open culture, Sarah? And what is your experience of parents in particular and being listened to by providers? Does it need to change? And I've got a document that came out, I think it was yesterday or today, which is obviously the government review of Regulation 9A, which is visiting and accompanying in care homes, hospitals, and hospices. So very timely. But what's your sort of take on that?
I think I've worked in both, and one of the reasons I set up consultancy and our own provider was because I've seen closed cultures and where perhaps the leadership was lacking in that ability, to have the duty of candor, to be able to speak up, where you can't be a yes person in social care, and I'm certainly not a yes person. I call myself a professional stick poker, if you like. And I think that's so important because we can't just accept the status quo. And if you have a leader or an owner of a business that's, potentially bullying, or they're trying to protect and sweep things under the carpet, that's what I would quantify as a closed culture, where there's not an ability or a willingness to learn. And, like Tim said, reading a lot of, we often get contacted, help, we're in trouble. Can you help us? And when you read the reports, it's often under the safe and well led where people fall over mostly. And I would say one word that I always talk to providers about is accountability in leadership. I'm a fellow of the Charter Management Institute, and they talk about accidental managers. In order for a service to thrive, you need good, educated leaders. I coach leaders in being better leaders, and you see, you can only take a horse to water, but you can't always make them drink. And you can coach and say, have you done this action and that action? So it's all about doing the right thing. I think echoing what Eddie said about open cultures is making sure that you're having team meetings, that you, in your induction process, that you're saying, if you have a problem, come to us. We will try and sort it out before it gets sticky and it grows arms and legs. Make sure you're doing meaningful supervisions, that you are checking knowledge, that the training is not just tokenistic. That's where you have a learning culture and an open culture, and that you don't leave things until you come to a supervision, but that you can, and that's where you'll get a good responsive as well, because the leadership team is saying, we're here for you, we'll support you. And then the other part of your question was about parents and carers. And, that's a very big question. I often say, in social care, you've got so many people you have to keep satisfied. You've got the individual at the centre, but then you've got CQC, you've got the local authority or whoever's commissioning you, but then you've got the families. And just like all of us, we all have different families, and sometimes families act in the best interests of the people we support, but sometimes you have to be mindful that they don't. And I've come across both. I worked with an adult male once where the parents were trying to coerce and control a 30-year-old adult and wanting to see the care notes of someone who had capacity, and he didn't want that. So, you have to also bear in mind and know the right places to go to get advice and guidance. I think parents, as a parent who's been through the system, and you use words like battle and fight the system sometimes, you don't come with a toolbox or a roadmap. So for me, I'm very passionate about making sure that parents and carers, and even adult carers of adults and even older adults, have the right information. Having that skill and that advocacy ability to advocate for your child or adult child or elderly relative is very important in that carer journey. I was fortunate enough to work for a charity that used to do just that about 10 years ago, when the Children and Families Act came in, to skill up parents on even things like how to write a good DLA application, how to manage money, to see what benefits they could be entitled to. Also, how to have a professional conversation with a local authority, not to be an angry parent or a guilty parent or passive aggressive, but how they can be assertive in the knowledge that they know their rights around what an education, health and care plan might look like, or what transition to adulthood might look like. Those are all really difficult periods of time. I've been in a meeting today about, some parents not knowing what a deputyship is or what a DOLS is. Like Eddie said, and acronyms and abbreviations are part of what we deal with every day. But if you're a lay person, you can't possibly know those things. So having been in the SEND world as both a parent and a professional, I can come at it from both angles and hopefully steer the ship in the right direction. So, but yeah, I've got an absolute anathema to closed cultures, and I will walk away from providers where I think that that's the case. And I think all of us here on the panel would say the same thing. We want to work with providers who want to put a smile on the face of our clients every day, that they are taking positive risks. Seeing one of my young persons who was 5 to 1, who was constantly trying to abscond to go to Alton Towers a few years ago. That's what I mean, being able to get them from 5 to 1 to 1 to have the same experiences that all of us should be able to experience.
Thank you, Sarah. No, and I think it's coming across the sort of breadth of your experience, and Eddie and Tim as well, on all sides, really. Sort of your experience, obviously, with Health Watch as well. I recall that. So no, it's great that we've got that sort of broad sort of vision, as it were, and that sort of balanced approach, I think, and pragmatic approach to things, but also that passion as well that underpins what you do. So I suppose now, really sort of looking at time and being aware, obviously we're getting towards the end of the webinar, but practical actions to prevent another Winterbourne View. This is open to all three of you. I just wonder, first of all, maybe I'll open it up to Tim, perhaps. Can you give some sort of practical actions, really? I think, the distinct angle that you've got as a former operator of services, but now obviously a consultant and trainer, Tim.
I'll do my best. So I'm going to stick to a very small number of actions. The first of which is keep closed culture at bay. And closed culture is always trying to creep into your service. And the only way to keep it at bay is to recognize that every service can fall victim to closed culture. Think about the risks associated with closed culture. Risk mitigate it. Raise awareness. Develop early warning signs. Look at the data. Look at the care records. How are those care records created? Are they person-centered or are they task-focused? What language is used? I read one recently and it said that the person was difficult this morning. Okay, it's a turn of phrase, but it's an indication of how the person providing the support felt about that individual at that moment. He was being difficult. Didn't say difficult to support, difficult with a specific thing. It just said he was being difficult. Look at the concerns, look at the suggestions, look at the complaints, look at the absence of complaints. If there are no complaints, why are there no complaints? Is it because people don't know how to, don't know when they should? Is it because they don't feel that they can? Or is it because they're just dismissed as moans and grumbles? And once I saw the service and they didn't have complaints, they just had grumbles. That sort of dismisses it, doesn't it? Because we should encourage people to give us their feedback. And when they do, we should say thank you and tell them what we're going to do about it. Look at the key metrics like staff turnover, retention. Look at the quality of supervision records. Look at the team meetings. Look at meetings you have with people that you support. And that brings me on to, we need accountability at all levels. Everybody that works in social care must be accountable for the quality of their work. And as I've said today, it's the small things that make the big difference. It's the way you speak as well as what you say. We've also got to invest in continuous quality improvement. I can remember how I was a provider of care in the early 1990s. Doing it really well, but measured by the standards in the early 1990s. If I were to do that today, I'd be horrified with myself, because the standards expected of us have changed considerably. You may well be the best service there is today, but unless you continue to improve, you will not be fit for tomorrow. And my final point, gotta keep up to date. Got to keep up to date, not just with the regulator expectations, but what is evidence-based best practice? What are other providers doing? Who's getting it right? Who's doing good stuff that we can replicate? And as I say to all of my clients, me and people like me, we go into lots of services. We see practice. It's good, some of it's bad, some of it's outstanding. But we are a conduit to share good practice. And I don't think that's a bad thing, because that just means the standard that we provide across the whole sector, it just goes up and up and up, doesn't it? So that's my 5 things. Keep closed culture at bay. Use your data to develop early warning systems for when it's going wrong. Accountability at all levels. Continuous quality improvement, and keep yourself up to date.
Fantastic, Tim. No, that's really helpful and incisive. Eddie, if I could move on to you now, could you give some pointers, really, in terms of safety, the safe culture, learning culture?
Yeah, I mean, Tim sort of summarized all of that, and I agree with all of what he said. I think something really powerful that often doesn't gets missed by providers is observation of what's actually happening. So if you're domiciliary supported living or in a care home, just stop what you're doing as a manager, as a regional manager, and just go and observe. There's loads of research about those that you're observing, how quickly they forget you're actually there. And I think observation is so powerful. I'm always led by an observation. It tells me so much about a service. You can often hear what Tim was saying, terminology used. You just notice the kind of the good stuff that's going on, but you also notice the not so good and sometimes unsafe stuff. And sometimes that only takes half an hour. But absorbing that, because that's what I do. I just sit there, kind of like try and pretend I'm doing something else and just soak it all up and take it all in. And then take that to the manager and say, do you know what I saw? And sometimes that is good stuff. And I say, you need to now document that. How are you going to reflect that? And then when it's unsafe stuff, I might have had to intervene if it's that unsafe. But if it's just potentially risky stuff, I've told them about it, then I'm going to look at that triangulation in their care planning. How are they managing that? What action are they going to take based on what I've shared with them? And I think observation, and I'm, because I've been an inspector, is that, that myth about pleasing the inspector, if you're doing all of the things, what Tim's saying, what Sarah's saying, what I'm advising and recommending, then you're getting it right from a regulatory point of view. So it's not about pleasing them. I know there is an expectation, but it's if you're getting all that right, then you're going to get a good and possibly even better rating.
Excellent. No, that's really sort of empowering. Thank you for that, Eddie. And just to say as well that my understanding is that Chris Badger, who's the Chief Inspector of Adult Social Care, he's very much focused on observation.
Yeah.
He wants to see his inspectors going out there and doing much more observation, less looking at records, more observation. That's really powerful.
And feedback. Don't forget the feedback.
Yeah. And the feedback. So, and Sarah, could I ask you to give some sort of examples as well?
Wow, follow that, Tim and Eddie. It's that accountability again. Tim said it, I said it before. I think partnership working can't be underestimated. If we work as partners, not a them and us, I always say that to my team as well. It's not the office team and the care team. We're part of one team. And to have that kind of culture as well is really important. And, every day is a school day. I used to tell my kids that, I always say that and having I don't mind someone coming into my service. You can't mark your own homework. And I think those providers that utilize the likes of Tim and Eddie or myself is also, showing good quality assurance. You know, I would welcome that to my service, so not be afraid. And I think, like Eddie said, if you're doing the right thing, your inspection with CQ should also be a chance to showcase the great work that you're doing. For those good and outstanding providers, why not? You know, don't be afraid of the regulator. You know, they're there to intervene when things go horribly wrong. But also, there's such a lot of excellent care out there. And, you know, every day is a learning day. You think you've seen it all, and then another day happens. I like what Eddie said as well about getting out there, doing spot checks. You're not in an ivory tower as a strategic leader. I like nothing better than to go in and sit in with the residents of our supported living, or going and visiting the home care settings that I consult with, to listen to them and see how they are doing. You know, it's everything, you know, but you get so much from that.
Right. Well, no, I think it's sort of it's very sort of, it's loud and clear that's coming through. You know, the importance of that sort of fresh pair of eyes going into services, particularly the likes of you, Sarah, and Eddie and Tim. You have this national perspective going back, obviously, quite a number of years. You know, you can sort of add so much, I think, to services around the country. So well done for what you do. What I'd like to do now is the moderation time of the webinar, if I may. And my colleague Lucy Bowker has very kindly agreed to be the moderator. So if we can try and sort of maybe pick up some questions that have come through on the chat, Lucy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd like to just encourage everyone, if you have got any thoughts, anything you'd like me to raise, please do pop it through on the chat. I've got one to start us off. There's a point from Anna Rose Mersch about mandatory training, and I think it's probably aimed, it sort of arose during Eddie's talk, so it might be best if we start with her and then open it up to the others. But she's sort of talking about stomp and stamp not being mandatory training in health and social care unless you're working in forensic mental health. And I just wondered whether you've got any thoughts on that, and whether you wanted to pick that one up.
Cheers, Lucy. So I think language is everything, as we keep talking about. So training is core. So I want to get away from mandatory and specialist training. Training is core if it's meeting the needs of the people that you're supporting. So from the very basis, so if you're obviously, if you're supporting adults with learning disabilities and autism, then that becomes core and mandatory. If you're supporting adults which have further diagnosis, that is core to your service. When it comes to, so training is layered. So CQC are looking not just for that tick box about have you attended a training and have you got a certificate. They're looking for that implementation under that regulation on the floor. So your training might be led. So it might be that you've just printed off the NHS England guidance on accessible information standard, or STOMP or STAMP, and you've then had a workshop yourselves, or you might have invited someone else to come in. So it's all about, and you've evidenced that. I think we need to get away from, you know what Tim was saying earlier on, gosh, if I think back when I was a registered manager, and kind of my paper records of training, etc. I was doing loads of inspiring stuff, I hope, but none of it was documented and recorded. So it is all about, you know, your managers will often be experts. You can link in with other managers to come and do workshops. So when it comes to what's core to your service, it's about what's working and what's working for the people that you're supporting in your staff team. I don't know if that's answered the question, but it doesn't all have to be a certificated training. The preferred learning disability training route is obviously the Oliver McGowan training for really significant reasons. Look at CQ's terminology about preferred and recommended when you're thinking about we have to. But if you aren't doing it and you use another provider, or you do something different and it's not working and not implemented in practice, and it's not effective in keeping people safe, then the regulator is going to comment that they haven't done the Oliver McGowan. Does that make sense? I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, that was really, really helpful. Does anyone have anything they wanted to add on that point, or should I move on to the next question? Okay, great. So one of the things that I'd like to sort of, it's been flagged, is that a significant part of this, the whole situation, is the commissioning of these services, and then the financial resources being a huge part of that. I've got a comment here from Vicky Morris, who wants to say that she hopes that the Casey review really opens this up and gives us the opportunity to reshape and revalue the commissioning of services for people with a learning disability and autism. Did you have anything you wanted to add to that, or has anyone got anything they'd like me to sort of?
I'll chip in if that's okay.
Of course.
I think we need to find different ways of providing care and support for people, but recognize that in the immediate and short term, those different ways might cost more money, but the cost in the long term could be much less. So it does cost a lot of money every week to move someone out of an inpatient hospital. But if that person can be supported to become more independent over the whole term that they'll need care and support, the whole life cost is much less, isn't it? But that means that commissioners have got to take the financial hit today and invest for the future. That's difficult though, isn't it, when there's limited funds? So I think what I'm describing is a utopia that needs national government to put funding behind this. So I agree with the person that made the comment. Let's hope that the Casey review does give some guidance on how to change this. But also that review has got an awful lot of things to sort out, hasn't it?
Sarah, I think you were trying to come in there too. I'm not sure whether you had anything to add.
Well, I think, it does come down to finances at the end of the day, and different, sometimes it comes down to individual social workers. I've had two similar clients with similar needs, but one had a much higher ratio of hours granted to them to another. And, that seems unfair. And I hear that time and time again, but I agree with what Tim said. Think in the USA, for example, they don't invest anything in early help and support for families, but they're spending billions on the justice system and prisons. I'd love to see the data on what that looks like. If we get it right in the beginning with children and young people, especially with those learning disabilities, you hear those words like troublemaker in schools, school exclusions, not in education and training, and then they could become a further problem downstream for the justice system. So, I hope the Casey report will look at how we can, I'm old enough to remember when the former Labour government had that sort of 0 to 5 initiative, and then, helping and supporting children in that zone, especially in sort of more financially deprived areas. So I think, and that's a whole nother conversation for another day, but, rather than having, like Tim said, more trouble upstream, that you get it right in the beginning and investing in that support.
Okay, no, thank you, each of you, for sort of contributing to today's webinar. I think we've almost, time is almost up, I'm afraid. It's been a very sort of interesting debate. I'd like just to sort of summarise at the end, really, just to say, obviously, we are acknowledging the progress that has been made over the last 15 years. There are superb providers out there in the community delivering exceptional specialist services in the most difficult of circumstances, particularly with the funding challenges that are sort of out there. At the same time, we know we've got to do more. More people should be out of the inpatient settings and in the community, so there's always more to do. We need intelligent regulation. We need effective commissioning based on outcomes, don't we? And obviously powerful providers, and also the consultants, today, that are given their time in their busy calendars. I think there's a key aspect, where you can make a real difference to the services that you support. So this is a starting point, this webinar. We plan to do sort of webinars every quarter. We can obviously look at doing a series of webinars if there's interest. For example, there's the whole issue about technology in care. and the transformation that's happening there. There's the whole issue of safeguarding teams and the Care Act, Section 42 investigations that we haven't really touched on, CCTV in care homes and other services. So there's a lot more that we could talk about linked to this particular sector, but also more broadly across children's and adult social care. So I'd just like to thank the speakers today, and to Lucy as well, and Prism, our sort of marketing support team here, Prism 55, who have put this on with us. There will be a handout, we'll be sort of sharing that. It's also being recorded as well, so if you want a copy of the recording, if you haven't been able to make it today, or you want to share it with colleagues, we can make that available as well, with links and resources. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and I wish you every success with your services in the future. Thank you.